The aggressive endeavour was driven by Andrew White, one of Australia's most gifted cave jumpers. Joining White was a gathered group of specialists, and there is no chance back to where they began. They need to keep on investigating the cavern to get themselves out their trying target, to be quick to investigate the Pannikin Fields cave, tremendous unfamiliar submerged framework lying 50 m underneath the surface. The endeavour was the cavern jumping likeness. Climbing Mount Everest, with the group being quick to wander so profoundly into the site, they intended to gather tests and lead review and cooperation, with the College of Sydney investigating until recently. Never got to regions. The undertaking gotten going anxious and energized as the group of jumpers, scientists and backing team advanced toward the remote Pannikin Plains cavern framework. The main week was spent camping out close to the cavern entrance and planning hardware like wetsuits, tanks, protective caps, submerge bikes, and more. Security checks were performed over and over to guarantee all frameworks were working appropriately prior to entering the watery void. Once prepared, the plunge group began mindfully making starting introductions to the overflowed passages and sinkholes in the primary week. Toward the end of the main week, the group had planned and recorded subtleties of the initial not many hundred FT of the cavern framework. In the second week, the jumpers drove further into the lowered caverns, laying rules and apparatus, submerged lights. To check their way, they began finding huge chambers and regions where passages expand every which way. Cautious reviews were led to log the size and subtleties of each sinkhole and passage, while searching for expected courses forward. The most encouraging ways were set apart for additional investigation. At this point, the group had ventured almost a 4 mile into the cavern framework and were excited with the find. Up until this point, the initial 14 days created huge energy and inspiration to press on and perceive how far and profound the cavern framework reached out under ground. With surprising advancement in the main half-mile of passages, graphed, the endeavour couldn't hold on to push forward and keep disentangling the secrets held inside the lowered sinkholes of Pannikin Fields. By the third week, the campaign had gained wonderful headway, investigating the lowered caves of Pannikin Fields, cave driving over a portion of a mile into the old framework. They laid out a rambling camp at the incredible harmony, handling an enormous cathedral-like eye hole, 4 stories tall, that extended the length of over around 50% of a mile. This site would be their send-off point for trying plunges into strange passages, diverging the primary chamber from a cord. Handling the most experienced push jumpers, Andrew, Ron and Julia prepared and dropped once more into the cavern's vast entry shaft. Moving through the chilled waters, the jumpers crossed a fluid labyrinth of passages, winding ever more profound into the cavern. They intended to decide whether a promising passage they had spotted before gone on past a tightened region, holding the key to opening a greater amount of the cavern's secret miracles. Energized by the draw of investigation, Andrew and the group prepared and dropped once again into the cavern's vast entry shaft. The 7 individuals from the buckling endeavour swam through the winding, submerged sections, their headlamps slicing through the inky obscurity. Andrew White drove the group, checking his jumping watch at regular intervals. They were currently over a portion of a mile underneath the surface and a half-mile into the cavern framework. Andrew motioned for the gathering to stop at the entry limited ahead. He shone his light upwards, enlightening a heap of fallen rocks, impeding their way. Andrew checked his air measure. They were all running low jumpers. Utilize the 333 rule. You utilize 33% of air to plunge, 33% of air to rise, and a third ought to constantly be left for crises. They were rapidly wrapping up their stores for climbing, so they would have need to turn around. Dissatisfaction washed over Andrew. He was trusting this section could prompt the finish of the passage, yet their inquiry would need to hang tight for one more day. Andrew made a motion to switch course. The jumpers started the long swim back through the dull, claustrophobic passages, cautiously following their way as the primary glints of light showed up ahead. Andrew was at that point arranging their next endeavor, much to his dismay that this portentous choice, yet again, to continue to push, would mean catastrophe for himself, as well as his group. 2 days after the fact, after they were denied entrance by the cavern, they dropped down. This time, they would investigate all the cavern brought to the table for traveling through the quiet murkiness. The group of jumpers in the end showed up back at the limited fissure where they had been compelled to betray their past campaign. Andrew made a motion, and individually they started pressing and battling through the unimaginably close limitation, their plunging chambers scratching against the spiked rough walls, wring his teeth against the serious tension. Andrew pushed through until at last the section opened up before them into a colossal submerged bore opening. Climbing gradually through the dull water segment, the jumpers rose into a transcending burrow. Their lights moved across the walls yet lacked the ability to arrive at the roof covered far above them. In obscurity, a strong ebb and flow pulled at them as they swam forward, pushing further into a strange area. They investigated the recently discovered entry with developing fervor. Andrew attempted to stifle his expectations. They had been disheartened before, yet the passage kept endlessly going. Similarly, as they were beginning to tire, the passage finished unexpectedly. An enormous blockade of fallen stones hindered their direction, totally like an obstruction deliberately positioned to stop their advancement. Andrew shone his light across the impassable bar. With apprehension, there would be no pushing through this, with no decision except for to turn around. The group hesitantly started their long get excursion through the organization of passages once again to their far-off, yet again, camp at the cavern's entry. Their victory of revelation had become disillusionment. They had trusted that they would track down significantly more noteworthy insider facts behind the stones, yet what they found was one more block to their fantasies. The cavern anyway had another stunt at its disposal. The underlying investigation of the air buckles, the runway caves, had this great joint effort. Currently we're going above and beyond, in light of the fact that despite the fact that our researchers can get into the landing strip caverns and gather tests and set examples, we can't get submerged. As Andrew and his group, close to the campaign's end, anxious to retell astonishing stories of their underground disclosures, the Earth had plans of own. One would take steps to cover them everlastingly on the dry fields over a savage tempest. Got up 2 years of repressed downpour released in a couple of excited hours, setting off a persistent flood through the porous limestone. In no time a large number of gallons of water had penetrated through minute cracks in the stone far underneath. As Andrew and his group swam through the contorting sections, the stone walls around them started to thunder and break under the enormous strain. Pieces of stone broke free, plunging lower and obfuscating the water. With silt frightened, they moved back in the direction of the far-off entrance, kicking quicker now against the reinforcing momentum. Frantically they looked for a getaway, looking for some little crevice or passage diverging the fundamental way. How behind was totally obstructed, and ahead lay just obscure murkiness. Their circumstance appeared to be irredeemable, and the rising waters kept on rising. Andrew acknowledged with unfolding ghastliness that the weighty precipitation had started to immerse the most unfortunate limestone of the sinkhole roofs and walls. Over long stretches of time, somewhat acidic downpour water had additionally bit by bit disintegrated gaps into the limestone. Now the additional load of the waterlogged rock caused pressure breaks to part open. The group attempted to rush back to the cave entrance as rocks and silt shook free around them. However, soon the entry ahead was impeded by enormous stones. They went to find another course. However, at that point the stunning vibration of the ground above expanded as the precipitation escalated. The entry roof behind them gave way in seconds, destroyed by the outrageous water tension inside the soaked sinkhole. Andrew and his group were caught somewhere inside the caverns, their exit fixed off by the breakdown. The jumpers acknowledged they would need to discover another way on the off chance that the unsound cave sections didn't flood or completely collapse first. With oxygen running low, Andrew drove them more profound into the tricky caves, seeking divine intervention for a marvel currently caught. Mostly, up the cavern's entry shaft, all courses to the surface were shut behind an imploded rubble heap. Roosted on a delicate edge, Andrew and Vicky felt the roof moan and break above them, ready to cover them like a Goliath's clench hand. Things were falling into place for them. They faced two nerve-wracking decisions: bet on a salvage through moving stone and trust, blurring quick, or dive into the cavern's overwhelmed labyrinth, endeavoring a frantic creep to opportunity. Ever the strong traveler, Andrew decided to put his life in danger and make a run for it. Trust close by, he went into the chasm, plunging into web of risk. In an outsider climate, has every one of these preliminaries and things that will be placed before that gathering to keep them from getting out securely, with a foundation in cave jumping and salvage missions, and Rue assumed a significant part in the extraordinary excursion that unfurled underneath the world's surface. Followed was a serious break of swimming, climbing, and mauling through the cave's overwhelmed maze. Their headlamps glinted like biting the dust fires in the dim water, the air thick with dread, and the smell of limestone. Ron's weak radio transmission punctured the stone someplace ahead, directing them like a reference point in this generally hazardous of minutes. They proportioned each taste of water and piece of food from their packs, their main possibility having sufficient solidarity to make it out. The rising waters kept rising constantly around them. They had to just barely get through unthinkably close passages and sharp stone fissure that tore their wetsuits, lungs consuming. They at last surfaced in a little upper chamber, panting for breath. Forward they squeezed through the obscurity, pushed by quickly diminishing expectations. Similarly, as it appeared to be their solidarity could bomb, Andrew saw it. A little shaft of light far above. Things were definitely looking up for them as Andrew faced the challenge to swim to the cavern entrance. Stone the size of little vehicles were all the while falling around him. His spotlight had passed on, and the cavern was presently only completely dark, utilizing just their aid rope and his sense to direct him through. He went inch by inch, wanting to think not to cause another cavern in. He knew time was a valuable product. The cavern frameworks were all the while loading up with water, and he didn't know how long the others could remain in that pocket of air in the cavern. Despite everything, Andrew meticulously swam across the gorge between falling flotsam and jetsam and rocks in a couple of hours to arrive at the surface to call for help. It was a rush against time before the other people who were caught underground ran out of water and oxygen, for this was a ticking, delayed bomb. The cavern could implode in on itself any time after showing up 32 minutes after the fact. Their salvage group zeroed in on laying out correspondence with the 14 cavers actually caught underground. Luckily, they had the option to contact the caught people, utilizing two-way radio equipped for communicating signals through strong stone. Notwithstanding being covered profound underground, their caught cavers stayed courageous and hopeful, having apportioned their restricted food and water supplies. The heroes started their plunge into the cavern's profundities all too early. They ended up crushed inside horrendous passages that pressed their bodies. The sharp walls shut in dimness encompassed them. Pushing forward, the group wrestled with disguised underground cavern frameworks, that additional layers of eccentricism and peril. One of the heroes proceeded to say that a staggering feeling of fear came over the heroes as the caverns contorted. Sections conveyed them more profound into the cavern's guts. It was not difficult to allow frenzy to assume control over their psyches, realizing that one wrong turn could leave them similarly as caught. As those they looked for, the pressure arrived at its top as heroes came to the group's previous camp at Harmony. Handling their breathing developed more worked as they crept ahead into the claustrophobic dimness. At one point, the group ended up caught in a quickly flooding chamber because of the downpour. However, they needed to continue to push on to recover the 14 snare Jumpers yet, the assurance to save their kindred cavers kept them slithering ahead through the severe underground labyrinth 27. Anguishing hours passed before the main missing jumper was at last spotted battered and dazed from absence of food. Furthermore, water individually, the hunt groups found the others likewise feeble and perplexed, yet marvelously, as yet gripping to life-lashing breathing apparatuses. To the jumpers' faces, the heroes directed them through the slippery landscape. The excursion to the surface was tiring, requiring another 15 careful hours, yet in the end, each of the 15 arose once more into sunshine, where clinical groups anticipated to treat them. However, they had barely gotten away with their lives. The jumpers' experience left enduring scars. Some battled with recollections of the nerve-wracking experience, tormented by fits of anxiety and bad dreams. Larger part of the group, caught under the caverns, extreme pressure disorder, as well as various types of PTSD that delivered them unfit to proceed with cave. Investigating later, Andrew co-composed the imaginary film Sanctum, inexactly founded on Pannikin plains, and his cavern-plunging mastery. This was Australia's most noteworthy netting film. In 2011 he teamed up with James Cameron on submerged narratives and 3D sea investigation films before his disastrous demise in a helicopter mishap in 2012. The tradition of the actual campaign grandstands how occasions can significantly shape network